He died on the exact same day Dr. Mark Sloan first appeared on Grey's Anatomy, 20 years later on the same date. It wasn't his television debut, but it was the moment the entire world came to know Eric Dane, February 19, 2006. That's not a coincidence. That's a story. Eric Dane entered Grey's Anatomy in February 2006 as the man every woman wanted and every man envied. 6 feet tall, blue eyes, a towel, and a nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life, McSteamy. But here's what nobody was talking about while it was happening. While millions of people were falling in love with a fictional doctor, the real man behind that character was quietly falling apart, addicted, depressed, carrying a wound from childhood that had never fully healed. And then, nearly 2 decades later, when he had finally found peace with himself, a disease no one survives showed up and changed everything again. But instead of retreating, instead of hiding, he did something almost nobody does. He turned the worst moment of his life into a mission for others. This is not just the story of an actor. It's the story of a man who spent his entire career playing complex, broken characters, never realizing he was actually working through his own story until it was almost too late to write the ending. Eric William Dane was born on November 9, 1972, in San Francisco, California. He had a younger brother, a mother who raised them in the Jewish faith, and a father he loved completely by all accounts. He was 7 years old when his father died by suicide. 7. That's the number that defined everything that came after. Every role he chose, every addiction he developed, every breakdown he had, and ultimately, the letter he left for his daughters. In interviews years later, Dane described what it was like to lose his father at that age. He said he wanted to explode, but held everything in. A 7-year-old boy who decided that grief was not something he was allowed to show. That's a dangerous lesson to learn so young, because it doesn't go away, it just goes deep. And when it finally came back to the surface, decades later, in the middle of the most famous role of his career, it came back hard. But before all of that, there was the dream. Eric fell in love with acting as a teenager, not because it was glamorous, because it was the only place his feelings had somewhere to go, where being someone else for a few hours wasn't chaotic, it was relief. He started small. His first television credit was on Saved by the Bell in 1991. Then came years of small roles: Roseanne, Zoe Duncan, Jack and Jane, Charmed, where he played Jason Dean, the love interest of Alyssa Milano's character. Enough to survive, but not enough to stand out. For over a decade, Eric Dane was that guy you almost recognized, almost cast, almost known. And then a bathroom scene changed everything.
By 2005, Grey's Anatomy was already a phenomenon. Shonda Rhimes had created something rare, a medical drama that people didn't just watch, but felt. And the show needed a new character, a plastic surgeon with a bad reputation, a complicated history, and the kind of confidence that fills a room. Eric Dane showed up for what was supposed to be a guest role, a single episode, and then he walked out of the bathroom with a towel. The internet didn't exist the way it does today, but the reaction was immediate. ABC's phone lines were reportedly flooded. Meredith Grey herself, Ellen Pompeo's character, gave him the nickname on screen, McSteamy. The joke was that it was ironic. The truth is, it stuck. By the 3rd season, Eric Dane was a series regular. Over the next 6 years, he appeared in more than 130 episodes. Dr. Mark Sloan became one of the most beloved characters in the show's history, a man who started as a villain and evolved into something far more complex, a loyal friend, a passionate surgeon, a father who would do anything for his daughter. And what's fascinating about that arc, because it wasn't just a character arc, it was Eric Dane working something out in real time. Mark Sloan was a man who hid behind confidence, who used charm as armor, who took years to let people see who he really was underneath. Sound familiar? But while that was happening on screen,
something darker was happening off it. By his own admission, years later, in a brutally honest appearance on Dax Shepard's podcast in 2024, Eric said, "If you take all 8 years I was on Grey's Anatomy, I was messed up more than I was sober." He had been a recovering alcoholic before the show, but the pressure, the fame, the chasm between who people thought he was and who he really felt he was, it all overwhelmed him. He relapsed during the 2007-2008 writers' strike, and then, after a sports injury, he became addicted to prescription painkillers. In June 2011, with his wife Rebecca Gayheart pregnant with their second child, he checked himself into a treatment center in California. He didn't have to, no one forced him, but he now had 2 daughters, Billy, born in March 2010, and Georgia, who arrived in December 2011. And he had made a decision, even without fully realizing it, that he would not become what he had lost. He would not be the father who disappears. Even after rehab, the fight wasn't over. In 2012, after 8 years on Grey's Anatomy, Eric Dane left the show. His character, Dr. Mark Sloan, died, killed in one of the most devastating story arcs in the show's history. Millions of fans mourned the death of a fictional man. But in a 2024 interview, Eric quietly revealed the real story. He said, "I didn't so much leave as I think I was let go." He acknowledged that the addiction hadn't helped. The producers hadn't fired him because of it, but it hadn't helped either. He was 39 years old, freshly out of the most famous role of his career, still fighting demons he had carried since he was 7, and suddenly without the structure the show had provided. So he did what many men in that situation do. He moved on. In 2014, he joined TNT's Last Ship, a post-apocalyptic military drama in which he played Captain Tom Chandler, a Navy commander trying to save what remained of humanity from a global pandemic. It was a lead role, straightforward, heroic, exactly the kind of role you'd cast Eric Dane in. For 4 years, it worked. And then, in April 2017, production was halted. Not because of ratings, not because of network problems, because Eric Dane asked for a pause. He was suffering from depression, serious, clinical, debilitating depression. The producers agreed, and production was suspended until Memorial Day. A month later, Rebecca Gayheart filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. After 14 years of marriage, 2 daughters, a life built together. The silence that followed was deafening. No headlines, no statement, no public breakdown. He simply stepped back. And in that space, something changed. In 2019, Sam Levinson was building Euphoria for HBO, one of the most provocative, visually stunning, and emotionally raw shows ever made for television. Zendaya would anchor the series. Jacob Elordi would play her destructive ex-boyfriend, Nate Jacobs, and they needed someone to play Nate's father, Cal Jacobs. Cal was not McSteamy. Cal was the opposite of McSteamy. He was a man who had buried his true self so completely that he had become a monster to everyone around him, including himself. A closeted bisexual father riddled with self-hatred, who transformed his shame into control and terror over his son. It wasn't a sympathetic role. It wasn't meant to be. Eric Dane took it immediately because he understood Cal Jacobs in a way that went beyond technique. He told Glamour in 2019, "I've certainly had my struggles with alcoholism, substance abuse, mental health, and I know what it's like to have to keep up a facade and have an outer experience that doesn't match the inner experience. That's not acting preparation, that's autobiography." And audiences felt it. Every time Cal appeared on screen, it was impossible to look away, not because he was charming, but because he was terrifyingly real. A man suffocating inside his own life and dragging everyone around him down with him. Euphoria aired its first season in 2019, its second in 2022. And while Zendaya, Jacob Elordi, and Sydney Sweeney became global stars, Eric Dane was quietly delivering some of the most powerful work of his career in a supporting role, and nobody gave him an Emmy nomination for it. In a fairer world, they might have. But when the third season of Euphoria was being prepared, something else had changed again. This time, something physical.
It started in early 2024. A weakness, just a slight weakness in his right hand. The kind of thing you'd chalk up to your phone or having slept in a bad position or aging. Eric Dane was 51. He ignored it for a while. Then it got worse. 9 months of doctors, specialists, tests. The kind of medical journey where each appointment feels like a door closing. And then, finally, a diagnosis no one wants to hear. ALS. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, Lou Gehrig's disease. A progressive neurodegenerative disease that destroys the nerve cells that control muscles. There is no cure. There is no stopping it. There is only the question of how quickly it progresses. In April 2025, Eric Dane made it public. He didn't have to. He could have kept it private. He could have quietly disappeared. Instead, he gave interviews. He spoke with Good Morning America. He sat down with Diane Sawyer on national television and told the world exactly what was happening to his body. And in that interview, he said something that broke everyone's heart. He said, "My father was taken from me when I was young, and now there's a great chance that I'll be taken from my daughters while they're still very young." The same fear, the same wound 30 years later, passed down not by action, but by disease, by fate, by the kind of cruelty that makes no sense no matter how long you think about it. By June 2025, he had completely lost the use of his right arm and hand. By October 2025, he was in a wheelchair full-time. 4 days after making his diagnosis public, he returned to set to film the 3rd season of Euphoria. 4 days. And then, in October 2025, he did something almost no one who heard about it could fully comprehend. He played a firefighter with ALS in an episode of Brilliant Minds. Not as metaphor, not as a statement, as an actor, doing his job, on a set, in front of a crew, in a role that required him to confront on camera the same disease that was taking his life in real time. When he finished that scene, the entire crew stood up and applauded for 10 minutes. Showrunner Michael Grassi said afterward, "Eric's performance was so raw, so vulnerable, and so moving. It was so beautiful." And that same month, he flew to Washington, D.C., not for press, not for an award, to lobby Congress for ALS research funding, to fight for the Accelerating Access to Critical Therapies for ALS Act, to use the time he had left to ensure that the people who came after him would have better options. He told them, "I no longer feel like my life is about me." In his final months, Eric Dane recorded an episode of Famous Last Words for Netflix. It aired the day after he died. In it, he left a message for his daughters, Billy, 15, and Georgia, 13, the girls who were the center of his world, the girls he feared leaving the same way his father had left him. He told them 4 things. First, live now, not in the past where regrets live, not in the future that remains unknown. Now, the present is all you have. Treasure it. Second, fall in love, not necessarily with a person, with something, a passion, a purpose, something that makes you want to get up in the morning. He fell in love with acting as a teenager and said it helped him get through his darkest hours, his darkest days, his darkest year. He said, find something, find your path, your purpose, your dream, then go after it. Go after it for real. Third, choose your friends wisely. Find your people and give everything to them. He said, they don't do anything special. They just show up. That's very important. Just show up. And fourth, the one that rang most true from a man who had faced more than most people ever will. Fight with every ounce of your being and with dignity. He said, this disease is slowly taking my body, but it will never take my spirit. He closed by saying, fight, girls, and hold your heads high. And then, Billy and Georgia, you are my heart. You are everything to me. Good night. I love you.
These are my last words. Eric Dane died on February 19, 2026. He was 53 years old. It was the 20th anniversary of the day he first appeared on Grey's Anatomy. There's something profound about an actor who spent his entire career playing men who were hiding. Mark Sloan hid behind charm. Cal Jacobs hid behind control. Tom Chandler hid behind duty. And Eric Dane, the real man, spent years hiding behind all of it, behind fame, addiction, silence, the facade that everything was fine when nothing was. And then a disease appeared that made hiding impossible. You can't hide ALS. You can't act your way past it. You can't charm your way out of it. So he stopped hiding. He sat in a wheelchair and went to Washington. He put himself in front of a camera and played himself dying. He sat in front of his daughters and told them what he had learned, not from scripts, not from directors, but from a life that had been harder and more beautiful than any character he had ever played. He wasn't remembered only as McSteamy in the end. He was remembered as a man who, in the face of the impossible, chose to make it mean something for someone else. That's not acting. That's character. And that is how Eric Dane will always be remembered. Not for the towel, not for the nickname, not for the spotlight, but for the man who chose, even facing the end, to fight for something greater than himself. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this about the real people behind the characters, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.